you see or observe that led you to say she has absolutely no idea what's going on?
She was not aware that there was a standoff between Mr. Boyd and officers.
And you referred to this as a standoff. Why do you describe it as a standoff?
Because he was not complying and he was not cooperating with officers.
Okay. Now, what concerns did you have as you videotaped that woman run by?
She was pretty close to harm's way.
Okay, and why do you believe she was close to harm's way?
Because she was near someone who was threatening police with their guns drawn at him.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'm going to play another clip from Defendant Perez's Exhibit B4, and that is from minute 10 to minute 10:53, and it has been clipped to comply with the court's order.
And he has a hand in his pocket. He's just not, he's not cooperating.
I'm going to pause the video. On that day, were you able to see what was in Mr. Boyd's right hand at that point?
I could see it through the camera.
Okay. And what was in his right hand, Mr. Fixting?
It was a shiny object that appeared to be a pocket knife.
Okay. We'll go ahead and continue watching this clip.
I received a telephone call from Detective Sandy.
Okay. And were you on duty when you spoke to Detective Sandy?
No, I was not.
And where were you located when you spoke to Detective Sandy?
I live in Las Lunas, so I was leaving my daughter's soccer practice, and it was in Las Lunas.
Okay. And after speaking with Detective Sandy, what did you do?
I drove my daughter home from practice. I changed my clothes and got in my work truck and started to proceed to work.
Okay, and when you say you started to proceed to work, what do you mean?
So I got in my government vehicle, because I was in my personal vehicle at the time, and got ready to come into town. So I started driving into town.
Okay, and where were you driving to in town?
The description, according to the dispatcher, was 812 Piedra Vista, I believe.
And why is it that you decided to respond to 812 Piedra Vista?
The information that I received from Detective Sandy was that he was requested with a taser shotgun, and I also had a taser shotgun. So I felt that if we had one, we could probably use another one at a scene, so I decided to go two.
Okay. Why did you think it would be beneficial to have two taser shotguns instead of just one?
Not knowing the entire circumstance of what we're doing, but having different areas or coverage within that particular incident, that we could use it from another perspective if we needed to.
Okay. And before we move on, I'd like to briefly talk to you about what a taser shotgun actually is. So to begin, just briefly describe what a taser shotgun is for the jury.
So a taser shotgun is a less lethal device that we have or had at the time in the police department. The device is shot from a 12-gauge shotgun platform, but it's a non-lethal round. So it's basically an encapsulated taser device inside a body that is shot through the shotgun to give an extended range and feed to a subject. The shotgun round itself basically has like large barbs on the front, kind of like a cactus, and then it's got a body that breaks off that houses the battery and the charge, and then that part also has what they describe as more barbs, which are like a large cactus quill, if you will, and that's meant to penetrate clothing and gain that exposure to the skin.
And how is a taser shotgun different than a normal taser that you would carry on your belt as an officer?
So the charge itself is very similar, but because it's encapsulated, you can reach out to a further distance and affect that control with it. The other difference is it does give a longer duration of the electric incapacitation charge. That one's 20 seconds, and that's designed to allow the officers to move up to effect an arrest during that time that taser charge is still en route. The handheld taser is only 5 seconds, so it's intended for a much closer distance.
And at the time of the March 16th, 2014 incident, were you certified to use that taser shotgun?
I was.
And if you could, very briefly, please explain what process you underwent to become certified to use that tool.
Sure. So another classroom-style portion of instruction from an instructor, and then after that classroom instruction, then we would go out to the range, and then we do a qualification with that particular system. And that one in qualification was firing a couple rounds at a blank target to verify the usage of the system.
Okay. And in addition to firing the taser shotgun during that training course, had you ever used a taser shotgun prior to the March 16th, 2014 incident?
I had not, no.
Okay. And had you seen them used?
I had seen them used, yes.
Okay. And if you could briefly describe how effective a taser shotgun is based upon you having seen it been used.
The taser shotgun can be effective in basically limiting or incapacitating somebody's movement and being able to do that.
Now, going back to March 16th, how much time did it take you to travel from your daughter's soccer practice to the location of the incident?
I would say about 30 minutes.
Okay, and during the time that you were traveling, what, if any, other information did you gather about the incident that was taking place?
I spoke with Detective Sandy briefly. He advised that he was en route to a call in which a subject had possibly assaulted officers with knives, and that I was trying to get my computer booted up as it was not obviously running and wasn't on duty, and trying to get the rest of the information before I got on scene.
Okay. In addition to hearing that the subject, and we know that subject to be Mr. Boyd, correct?
That's correct.
And in addition to hearing that Mr. Boyd had threatened officers with knives, did you learn any other information about what was taking place?
I started scanning the foothills frequency to try to find out what they were doing and what they had was going on. I was just trying to decipher what the situation was and what they were doing with that particular subject.
Okay. And were you able to gather any specific information about what was going on at the scene?
That he was kind of in the open space area, and they had attempted to try to negotiate with him. That's about all I had at that time.
Okay. And did you respond to the actual open space area or another location?
The address given to me by dispatch was a street address there in the foothills, and so I responded to that address, and then I accessed the open space area through that citizen's yard.
Okay, and so after you arrived at that residence, and that's 1812 Piedra Vista, correct?
That's correct.
After you arrived at that specific address, what did you do?
Because I wasn't equipped to go to work, I had to get out and put on all my stuff, so I had to do that while I was there.
Okay, and when you say put on all of your stuff, what do you mean?
I had to put on my soft body armor. And the Repeat Offender Project, we were outfitted with heavier armor for rifle threats. So I had to put that on. I had to get, at this point, I got my rifle, I got my taser shotgun, and ensured that I had eye protection at that time.
Okay, and why did you put on this body armor that you'd mentioned?
Anytime we are doing anything with police work, we are wearing our body armor. This particular area and everything else that we have, the rifle armor is augmented armor from what a field officer would normally have, so it affords us more protection.
Okay. And you mentioned that you also gathered your rifle or picked up your rifle, is that correct?
That's correct.
And why did you choose to do that?
Again, not knowing what my job or role is going to be later on down the road, I try to be as prepared as possible and take everything. So not knowing what I was going to be doing specifically, taking all that equipment was essential.
And if you had been told by Detective Sandy that a taser shotgun was needed, why did you actually deploy with a rifle?
Again, just taking all the equipment that we could not know what my role was going to be once I got on scene.
Based on your training and experience, can roles change as scenes develop?
They can.
And lastly, you mentioned that you also took a taser shotgun with you, correct?
That's correct.
And how did you carry both your taser shotgun and your rifle?
They were on slings, so they were slung weapons so that my hands can still be free, but I still have both weapons on my body.
So despite having those weapons, your hands were free, correct?
Yes.
And lastly, you mentioned that you put on eyewear, correct?
I did.
What type of eyewear did you put on?
At that time of day, and the later time in the afternoon, I put on clear glasses at that time.
Why did you?
On
I'm
the
sorry.
time going, the sun going down.
Okay.
I didn't want to be caught with my sunglasses on if I didn't need them.
Okay. Now, in addition to the gear that you've talked about, did you have any recording devices on your person?
I did.
And please explain what recording devices you were equipped with.
I actually had two. So I had a digital camera and a digital recorder. So I had two.
And why did you have both a digital camera and a digital recorder?
Based on past experience with the digital cameras, we were having issues with that particular platform of cameras. So I wanted to ensure that it had both, and I was meeting SOP or the standard operating procedures, so I took both.
Okay. And are digital recorders also referred to as belt tapes?
Yes, that's correct.
And following the March 16th, 2014 incident, were both your lapel and your digital recorder collected into evidence?
The digital recorder was, yes.
And who collected your digital recorder?
Criminalistics personnel within the crime band collected that.
And do you know why that individual did not collect your digital camera?
I immediately disclosed to everybody and with the criminalistics band that I didn't think the camera caught anything. It didn't seem to be functioning as designed, so I immediately explained to him that I don't think the camera got anything at that time.
Okay. Did there come a time when your camera was collected?
It was several days later, but it was, yes.
And who collected it?
I want to say one of the detectives, but I don't remember specifically who I turned it over to.
Okay. So after you got all of this gear on, please explain what you did.
There was a lady in the driveway of the house, and she told me that I could go around kind of the south side of her house, kind of directed me around. So I went through the gate and met with Detective Sandy in the open space area.
Okay, when you say went through the gate, what gate are you referring to?
It was on the east side of their property, kind of adjoining to the open space area.
Okay, and when you walked through that gate, please explain to the jury what you saw.
There were several officers up higher on the hill communicating with a male subject at some distance. They were several yards above where that gate was, so they were several yards east of that. And so I kind of just walked out to the trailhead area and met with the personnel that were there.
Okay, and when you walked through that gate, were you able to tell where Mr. Boyd was located?
Based on the positioning of the officers that were already on scene, he was on a large outcropping further to the east.
Okay. And were you actually able to see Mr. Boyd?
He was standing up, yes.
Okay, and can you please describe his appearance?
He had kind of longer brown hair, kind of had a black and gray mechanic style shirt.
And at that time, were you able to get a good read on what Mr. Boyd's demeanor was like?
His demeanor, I mean, the officers were standing off from him. They did not, I mean, they weren't very close to him, within like an arm's reach, but it looked like they were trying to communicate with him from distance. He sounded like I couldn't tell exactly what he was saying, but he was acting like he was animated. So it seemed like he was boisterous, but I couldn't quite make out the conversation at that time.
Okay, and did Mr. Boyd's position up on that hill cause you any concerns?
It did.
What concerns did that cause you?
For officers to be able to traverse through that area and be in that rocky area was already a hazard. but up on that rock where he was at, it was significantly higher than where we were at the trailhead, significantly higher than what I would want to operate with, because he has kind of a height advantage. He can see the outlay of everything that we have to work with, but we can't see everything that he has to work with. So he's in a position of advantage over us because he's been able to look down at us and see that, see everything that we have, but we can't see everything that he has.
And after you walked through that gate that we've discussed and observed the terrain of that area, what did you do next?
I walked towards Detective Sandy, and I believe there was a couple canine officers there.
Okay, and where was Detective Sandy located when you walked towards him?
For point of reference, there was a large trail that kind of runs north and south there. There was a larger tree to the kind of north and east of the property that we went through, and so they were somewhat near that point.
Okay. And when you saw Detective Sandy, was he carrying any weapons?
He did have his department rifle and his taser shotgun and his sidearm.
So he was equipped basically like you were.
That's correct.
Now, after you saw Detective Sandy, what did you do next?
We were talking to the canine officers, trying to figure out what the situation was.
Okay. And what did you learn about the situation during that conversation?
We did learn that there was 2 open space officers that made contact with Mr. Boyd, that he at some point produced knives, and that during that time they backed away and felt threatened by him.
And what, if any, concerns did that information cause you?
It causes me great concern because I know at some point in time this subject has committed a felony offense, and at some point in time he's going to be arrested for that offense. And because he's armed and because he has that capacity, it causes me more stress that this is going to be a hazardous situation to work through.
When you said, that you knew at some point in time he was going to be taken into custody, what do you mean by that?
He was going to be arrested for the offense of the aggravated assault on the other officers.
And how long did that meeting last that you had with, I believe you said, Detective Sandy and canine officers?
I don't recall the specific amount of time, but it was a few minutes.
Okay. And why did that meeting come to an end?
We started kind of moving into position. We moved up a little bit to the east.
When you say you moved up a little bit to the east, please explain to the jury what you mean.
So there was, from where we were at, we were still a little bit too far to affect any custody procedure or negotiation with Mr. Boyd from that first position at the trailhead. So we took a secondary position along a large piece of granite that was about half the distance to Mr. Boyd and where we were at initially.
Okay, and why did you move up to what you've described as a large piece of granite?
The large piece of granite afforded us some cover, and being in that position, we could see more and kind of find out what we needed to do.
And who made the decision to move up to that large piece of granite, if you know?
I don't know.
Okay. Did you make that decision?
No, I didn't.
You mentioned that large piece of granite provided you with cover. What is cover?
In police lingo, we use cover as something that would stop a bullet or stop a round of that effect. Cover is that kind of device or apparatus that would stop that. So a large piece of granite would be cover.
Why were you concerned with having cover?
Not being able to see everything that Mr. Boyd had access to, and the position that he was in, much higher, elevated from us, presented a very significant harm to us because we can't obviously stand out open in the open space area, not knowing what he had access to. So using that position of cover afforded us a little bit of protection at that point, and kind of gave us a little bit more of an area to to operate in and be able to organize their efforts, if you will.
So you went from standing near the tree to that piece of granite, correct?
That's correct.
And when you were at that piece of granite, were you able to see Mr. Boyd?
I was.
Can you please describe his appearance at that time?
Same as before with that gray shirt, and he was pacing back and forth around that outcropping area where he was at.
Okay. And were you able to hear Mr. Boyd, anything he was saying?
At that point, we were able to start to get more of the conversation of what he was talking about and what he was doing.
And what was he talking about?
He was talking about a lot of things. He was talking about getting a hotel voucher.
Anything else?
At that time, Officer Weimerskirch from K-9 ended up taking over most of the communications with him and started to try to figure out what his needs were, what we could do to help him out.
And when did you first come in contact with Officer Scott Weimerskirch?
I don't remember exactly if he joined us at the trailhead or if it was at that piece of granite.
Okay. And at that point when Scott Weimerskirch was there, at least, who was present at that piece of granite?
So it was myself, Detective Sandy, and Officer Weimerskirch at that point.
Okay. Now I'd like to talk to you about some additional information that you gathered as you got closer to Mr. Boyd. And to do that, I'd like to use your digital recorder or your belt tape as you've referenced. And since the incident, have you listened to your belt tape?
I have.
And did you recognize your voice on that belt tape?
I have.
The voice of your fellow officers?
Yes, I have.
Mr. Boyd's voice?
Yes, I have.
And when that audio recording was it created contemporaneously with the incident that the belt tape was recording?
That's correct.
And are belt tapes, based on your understanding, kept by APD officers and APD in the regular course of business?
They are.
And based on your review of your belt tape, is it a true and accurate recording of your encounter with Mr. Boyd on March 16th of 2014?
It is.
Now, there is also a transcript of your belt tape recording, correct?
That's correct.
Have you had an opportunity to review that transcript?
I have.
Did you have an opportunity to compare the transcript with your actual belt tape recording?
Yes, I have.
And did that transcript, was it an accurate and fair representation of what was captured on your digital recorder?
Yes, it was.
Your Honor, at this time, I move Defendant's Exhibit C4, which is Sergeant Richard Ingram's belt tape, and Defendant's Exhibit D8, which is a transcript of his belt tape. And based on our earlier conversation before lunch, Your Honor, we can simply submit a disc that contains the clips that I'm going to play.
And with that, Your Honor, depending on what those are, if they're actually relevant, we would not necessarily have an objection, but would like, know what they're going to play. So we object to the whole thing coming in.
So can you, for counsel, indicate the page and line?
There are several.
Well, just one.
Okay, absolutely. And the first.
Can you give them the first one and so I can look it up while you're asking questions?
Yes. The first one that I intend on playing in a moment, Your Honor, is on the transcript. It's page 10, line 11, to page 12, line 25. Now, when you were, and we'll get to the belt tape in a moment after counsel has a chance to review that transcript, but when you were at that piece of granite, had you seen Mr. Boyd with his knives?
Yes, I had.
Okay. And could you please describe the appearance of the knives you saw Mr. Boyd holding?
They appeared to be folding knives.
Okay, and will you please describe how Mr. Boyd was handling his knives?
Mr. Boyd had them in his front pockets, and at times when we were instructing him to take them off or put them down, he would become very agitated at us and he would produce them from his pockets in a very quick manner.
Okay. And with the court's permission, I would like Sergeant Richard Ingram to stand and demonstrate for the jury how Mr. Boyd would take his knives out of his pockets and how he'd put them back into his pockets.
That's fine. And,
Yes.
when you're physically showing the attorney what you observed, can you describe it for the record as well?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may ask a question.
Okay. Will you please
Do we
demonstrate?
have a model of the knife?
If you could just, Your Honor, may the witness use a model of the knife to demonstrate?
Any objection?
Yes. Yes, Your Honor. I think it's 403, Your Honor.
Can we close shot? Oh, you overruled. Never mind. I don't want to approach that.
Now, Sergeant Ingram, I will assure you that these are just dummy knives, for a lack of a better term, but with no blade. And to begin, are the blades on those knives approximately how large the blades on Mr. Boyd's knives were?
They are similar, that's correct.
Okay. And if you will, for the jury, please demonstrate how you saw Mr. Boyd handling his knives.
May I take off my jacket? So both knives were in his front pockets, and I can't tell if they were blades up or blade down, but it was more the motion of if they were in his pockets, he would draw them out very quickly and efficiently, and have them out very quickly out of either pocket. There were times where he would get one knife out, and it was in that kind of stance, that he would get it out very quickly. And I'm sorry, these pants I'm not a little awkward, but he would get them out very quickly.
Okay. Thank you, Sergeant Ingram. And what concerns did you have when you saw Mr. Boyd handling his knives in the manner you've just described for the jury?
My concerns were that Mr. Boyd had at some point became very, in my perception, became very proficient in drawing those knives out of his pocket because of his ability to acquire them quickly and then put them back in a manner that he could draw them out again very quickly. So that was my perception, is that he was very practiced with it.
Now, at the time you arrived at the position of cover you've described near that granite rock, were you still holding your taser shotgun, or were you in possession of that taser shotgun?
I was.
And in terms of lethal or less lethal, how did you view your role in the incident?
At that time, my role was a less lethal option at that time.
Okay, and will you please describe what your understanding, based on your training and experience, of what your role was as less lethal?
Because my role was less lethal, that was my entire responsibility at that time. So once I got into that position of being the taser shotgun assignment, if you will, that consumed my responsibility as being the taser or the less lethal person at that point.
Okay, and did you have any lethal coverage?
I did.
And who was your lethal coverage?
At that time, Detective Sandy.
Based on your observations, was Detective Sandy in possession of his taser shotgun at that time?
I believe at the rock he was, yes, that's correct.
Okay. Did he maintain control of that taser shotgun throughout this incident?
No, I ended up taking it from him.
When did you take Detective Sandy's taser shotgun from him?
I believe it was at that second area that we were at, and because he was so focused on providing the lethal coverage, I took the taser shotgun from him to relieve him of carrying that particular weapon system while he was dealing with that.
And that was a decision you made?
Yes.
After you received Detective Sandy's shotgun, what weapons were you in possession of?
So I now had the two taser shotguns, my department rifle, and my sidearm.
Okay, and was it difficult for you to manage the lethal and the less lethal long guns that you had?
Difficult? No. They're all in slings, but it did make it cumbersome to maneuver, especially in that area with all the rocks. It did make it a little bit more cumbersome to move.
Okay. Did all of those rifles have slings?
They did.
So if need be, you could still use your hands.
That's correct.
And why didn't you simply set one of the taser shotguns you had down on the ground?
Not knowing the entire conditions of what we're dealing with, I can't just put down a weapon system, knowing that if at some point something changed dynamically, we had to move. I couldn't just leave that system just on the ground, ready for somebody else to pick up or use. So I had to carry it with me, and for safety reasons, I couldn't leave it there.
Okay. And was there any advantage to having 2 taser shotguns?
Well, the advantage would be if somebody else needed one and at some other point I still had access to it. And if something happened to one, I could still have access to another one. So there was some advantage.
Okay. Now I'd like to talk to you about the specific negotiations that were engaged in with Mr. Boyd. And to do that, I would like to play a portion of your ballot tape.
So I don't have an objection up until page 12, line 5, and then I have a formal one for the objection. And I'm happy to show it to you, Your Honor, if that's helpful.
Would you like us to approach?
Just context, Your Honor.
Let me see it.
So it's 10, what's your line?
Oh, okay.
So
The
this
page
is
10, line 11, page 12, line 25, the objections
after the highlighting.
after line 8. Or after line 5.
After line, in the middle of line 5.
Yeah, but then come up.
May I play that clip now, Your Honor?
If I bring the state police car here, you talk to him? Well, you know what the state police uniform looks like, right? There we go.
Hands up.
Let's resolve this, man. Let's take care of this right now.
Sorry to pass it off on you there, boss.
We tried this once already, but
Yeah.
we can give it another shot. It's your personality.
It'll take a barricade and make a rock.
that's what you're willing to accept? Put the knives on the rock? Come down and talk to us.
What'd you inform him? I just got here. What's the deal? What kind of knives do you have? Well, you wanted to... Ah, dude.
I instructed you to don't fucking try to unarm me anymore. And I want the fuck out of here back to my family. Who the charismatic fuck are you now? Huh? Who the fuck are you? What the fuck you did? I gave you goddamn instructions, man.
I'm just trying to... Hey, man, that's my fault. I thought you said you wanted state police to talk to you.
You said you wanted to see me.
Oh, I'll talk to you all day long, dude. Oh. So what branch of the service were you in? You're talking about OSI and everything.
I need to contact OSI. CID.
Or CID?
You better walk it out of here. You better walk the fuck out of here, or you bring the military here. You don't bring them, you bring them.
Now, Sergeant Ingram, in general terms, can you please explain what took place or what was taking place during that clip that we just listened to?
So Officer Wymaskirch is trying to communicate with Mr. Boyd, and at some point he kind of taps the shoulder figuratively of a state police officer to talk to him because he wanted a state police liaison. So the state police officer ends up trying to talk to him, and in that segment you can hear the state police officer giving him a command that to put down the knives and come down. Mr. Boyd's agitation level seems to rise, and so the state police officer kind of backs off, and then Officer Wymaskirch attempts to try to kind of de-escalate the situation or keep talking to him to see what we can do.
Okay, and based on your recollection, can you please describe what Mr. Boyd was doing while Officer Wymaskirch and the state police officer were talking to him?
So he's on that outcropping of rocks that we've kind of described up above us, and he's being very animated. He's pacing back and forth very angrily, moving back and forth around that area as he yells back at us.
And during the video clip we listened to, Mr. Boyd could be heard saying, "I instructed him, don't fucking try to unarm me anymore." Now, based on your observations, who was attempting to unarm Mr. Boyd?
So it was kind of a general command from all the law enforcement at the time, but it came directly from a uniformed state police officer at that time.
Okay. And why was it necessary to disarm Mr. Boyd?
Mr. Boyd presented a very significant danger to everybody, knowing that we were going to have to arrest him or place him in custody. So taking that off, taking his knives off and having that removed from the situation would potentially make this area and this contact much safer for everyone.
And when Mr. Boyd indicated that he'd instructed, you guys not to unarm him, what concerns did that statement cause you?
It's very troubling because he's making very definitive statements that we're not to unarm him. That's very definitive statements to me that he's being non-compliant or not cooperating with us in any shape or form.
And towards the end of the recording we listened to, Mr. Boyd can be heard saying, "I'm not fucking packing up and walking out of here. You better walk the fuck out of here or bring the military here." Did you hear that statement by Mr. Boyd?
I did.
And what concerns did that statement cause you?
That he's very persistent that he does not want to leave there, that we're going to have to leave, and that he's not leaving.
And how did you take Mr. Boyd's statement when he said, "You better bring the military here"?
It concerned me because he's starting to exhibit more signs of delusional thinking, that asking for the military at that point, my concern is that is he a prior military person? Does he have some experience there that would warrant more caution on my point, or dealing with somebody with PTSD or something like that?
Okay, and why specifically were you concerned about the possibility that Mr. Boyd could have had prior military experience?
Based on his abilities up there on that, in that terrain, in that environment, that he may have some advanced experience of being able to harm us in some way out there in that particular environment.
Now I'd like to play another clip for you, and it is from Perez's Exhibit C4, and that's from time 11 minutes 52 seconds to 12 minutes 1 second, and it's page 13. Actually, it's page 14, line 1 to line 4.
Same objections, Your Honor? Oh, I understand your ruling. Shall I show it to you?
So if there's a 403 objection, that's overruled. With regard to, this statement's already in evidence, so it's an opportunity for the attorney to question this witness with regard to this statement.
Your Honor, I believe it's been stated in opening. I don't believe it's in evidence.
Okay, then if it's not, that's not cumulative. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You know what? You better goddamn find me a motel right now, bastard fuck. I'm gonna hunt you down and kill you. That's my personal promise. You charismatic shitball.
Do you remember when during the course of this incident Mr. Boyd made that statement?
I believe he made it directly to the state police officer that was trying to communicate with him.
Okay. And what concerns did you have after you heard Mr. Boyd yell, "I'm going to hunt you down and kill you, that's my personal promise, you charismatic shitball"?
It's extremely alarming because he's making very definitive threats with very descriptive language.
And when you call that a definitive threat, what do you mean?
It's direct. You take it as what he's saying is my perception is what he's saying. I mean, he's really thinking wants to carry that out. I mean, it's very descriptive to me.
Did you take that threat seriously?
I did.
Why?
It's at some point in time, I know we're going to be trying to affect this encounter into a custody procedure, and he's being very disruptive, very hazardous, and just not being able to communicate normally. But he's very, very disturbed.
Based on your understanding, was Mr. Boyd still in possession of his knives when he made that promise that he was going to kill an officer?
He was.
Now, the next clip that I would like to play for you is from Defendant Perez's Exhibit C4. It's from minute 13:45 to minute 17:23, and that is from page 16, line 11, to page 20, line 11. Yes, page 20, line 11.
I actually haven't.
Oh, okay.
Sergeant Ingram. I'm going to play that clip that we've been discussing.
All right, so I just call you. What do you want me to call you? What do you want me to call you? Sir. All right, sir. Whatever works for you. Now, I keep on asking for CID or OSI.
We need to figure out resolving remedies or solutions tonight. Because I'm not packing up and walking out to make you look good.
Okay, well, no, I'm trying to figure out. You're talking. Are you a vet there? Did you serve or what?
I'm serving right now. The time, my service.
Okay, can the VA help? Is that what you need?
I'm not going to the VA.
Well, I'm talking about for like.
No, that's just murder police officers. I'm not going out there.
Well, I'm talking about for money and stuff.
Money and stuff. I have billions of dollars on me.
Okay, so,
Trillions. If I had my own life, I could make $1.5 million a year for myself. I could probably make a few. This stuff gotta go so I can get to my family and go fucking open up the door. I miss my son. I worked hard for him.
What's his major beef? Church?
so what's the major issue today?
All right, major info.
He's got information that's sent to the government.
Info. Providing you with this information.
It's on the phone.
I have tried for 5 months to contact APD, Sheriff's Department, and FBI.
Nobody's.
I went down to the Sheriff's Department. Personally. I went down to the FBI in person and I'm trying to arrest me. Alright, that's what I'm doing. My identity is gone. Even my New Mexico state identity is gone.
Okay, so,
I can't even get a motel with cash in my pocket. It's why I'm here. I went down to a motel 2 weeks ago and said, oh, hey. But they can't understand. You know what they told me? They said the police say you can't stay. Oh, so you don't cash.
I offered him to get a hotel security about that. But he didn't put the knife down for help.
okay, well, we're from APD, and we're here, so tell us what's up. I mean, it sounds like you've been turned away, and now we're out here on the side of a mountain on a Sunday afternoon. I'm trying to figure out how to help you. Okay, you know, I could agree with that. But what I'm saying is, we're here now, so if you want to have a voice for something, we're here.
What's state police doing? They're the supervisor.
The guy actually on the right's the supervisor. Someone said that you wanted state police, so we got state police. You want him to leave? Well, I can tell him to leave if you want him to go away. Oh. All right, so you don't want state police. You want to talk to APD?
I want to talk to state police. They're the only ones authorized to liaison.
Now, based on your experience and specifically your CIT training, what did you believe Officer Weimer-Skirch was attempting to do while he was talking to Mr. Boyd?
He's trying to de-escalate him by trying to find out what was the major issue at hand today that we could figure out some kind of resolvement for.
And during the recording, did you hear someone on this recording say, "What's his major beef"?
Yes,
Who was that?
that was me.
And why did you ask that?
Well, because he was communicating with Officer Weimer-Skirch and trying to maintain only having a single voice converse back and forth with him. In my experience with CIT, too many voices at one person tends to complicate the issue. So trying to have one person speak at the same time, at once. So that was me trying to give that suggestion to Officer Weimer-Skirch of what kind of question to ask and to try to see if we can get a response from Mr. Boyd.
Okay, and you mentioned that you believed Officer Weimer-Skirch was trying to de-escalate Mr. Boyd. did you believe, based on your observations, that he was successful or being successful in de-escalating Mr. Boyd?
There were times that Mr. Boyd would go back and forth along that spectrum of being almost rationale speaking and talking about getting a donut shop to being very bizarre, talking about having trillions of dollars on him. So it was very hard to tell at times if there was any progress in that de-escalation, but I don't think there was ever much progress.
And when Mr. Boyd was going back and forth, did that cause you concerns?
It did.
And why did that cause you concerns?
Well, the volatility of the situation of not knowing at which point of that spectrum is he going to be on when we're dealing with him, that causes great concern.
Now, Your Honor, I'm hesitant to say it, but there's another clip I'd like to play. It's from Defendant Perez's Exhibit C4, and it is from time 3304 to 3314, and that is page 40, lines 2 to line 5.
I'm not done. It's 40 to 42, yes?
Oh, no,
Page
just
40, line 2 through 5.
5,
Oh, I'm
yes.
sorry, yes, no objection. Other than,
You went.
go ahead. I was gonna say it should be complete all the way to 7, but that's, you can do that on the adjourn.
You waiting to get killed in the dark? I can see in the goddamn dark. I can smell the goddamn dark. I can live, die, kill, wake up in the dark. Who the fuck I am, man?
Now, when Mr. Boyd said you waiting to get killed in the dark, please explain what concerns that caused you as an officer on scene that day.
Well, it is getting closer to dark. The sun is setting, and he's making kind of a timeline threat of his actions. And so he's describing to us that's the time period that this is going to occur, which is alarming to me because I feel like at some point in time he's able to kind of gauge that with the timing. And being dark is going to make it increasingly hazardous for us because we're not going to see everything that Mr. Boyd's able to do up there on that particular part of the rock that he's at.
And if you could, at the time Mr. Boyd made that statement, what were the lighting conditions like on the mountain?
The sun was going down. I can specifically remember that the shadows from the rock were starting to cast very significant shadows towards the east. So it was starting to get dark.
Now, I'd like to play another clip from Defendant Perez's Exhibit C4, and that's from 3422 to 3428, page 41, lines 7 to 9.
Well, it's an incomplete clip, so I'm trying to read what's around it. Through the end of line 6, is that what you said?
7 to 9.
No objection, Your Honor.
I'm dying for you tonight. You're gonna die for me. You're gonna die for your family tonight.
Do you have a family, Sergeant Ingram?
I do.
Do you have a wife?
I do.
Excuse me, 4-1, 4-2, 4-3.
Now, based on your recollection and your observations of Mr. Boyd, who was Mr. Boyd's statement directed to?
This particular one,
Yes.
it was to all of us.
Okay. When you say all of us, who are you talking about?
The officers that were there. So Detective Sandy, Officer Wyman-Skirch, and me.
Okay. And how did it make you feel when Mr. Boyd told you that you were going to die for your family?
Same objections, Your Honor.
It's alarming.
Why was that alarming for you?
Well, because we're up there with the intention of keeping everybody safe, and this guy is telling us what he's going to do to that effect, so it is alarming.
And the next clip I'd like to play is from Defendant Perez's Exhibit C4, time 43:14 to 43:20. And this is page 49, lines 7 to 10.
Objection,
But we can ensure your safety if you do what we say.
What the fuck? I'll kill you right now, man!
Who made that statement? Well, we can ensure your safety if you do what we say.
That was me.
And why did you make that statement to Mr. Boyd?
And my CAT experience and being able to talk to people, that's one of the things that we try to ensure that we are there for them. We're trying to ensure his safety, but I need him to do what I say. And that's what that statement was, that I can ensure his safety if he did what we say,
Okay, and what were you telling him to do?
to put down his knives.
And at this point in the interaction, approximately how many times had you heard officers tell Mr. Boyd to put down his knives?
At this point, there were numerous times. I don't know if I have an exact number.
Okay. And when Mr. Boyd responded by saying, "I'll kill you right now, man," can you please describe the tone of his voice when he made that statement?
He's absolutely angry when he's saying that. He's very emphasized in his speech, and he's yelling, and yes, he's very, very agitated.
And the next clip I'd like to play is from Defendant Perez's Exhibit C4. It's from 46 minutes and 7 seconds to 46 minutes and 15 seconds, page 52, line 18 to 25.
Our objection is incomplete, Your Honor. The Mr. Boyd's continuation of state was on page 53. It includes all of that, no objection.
53 up to line 3.
Line 3.
Your Honor, my only objection would be that I've created a clip and I can't now extend that to incorporate what the state wants, but it seems like that would be perfectly appropriate on cross.
Does that satisfy the state's objection?
I'm sorry, Your Honor. It would not, again, if we'd known that Ingram was going to say, we would have had the rest of this clip.
Okay, so I'll ask you if you play it to then play your clip, but then you may approach the witness with page 52 and 53 if you need to.
Okay, what additional did you want, Ms. Montgomery?
Page 53 up to line
Up to line.
3.
3, just a continuation of a statement, and I think it makes sense.
If you give me yours, I'll just watch it.
Absolutely.
So I will play this clip for you, and then I will have you read the additional statements Mr. Boyd made.
You're also leaving page 52.
Okay.
Drop the knife, man. Come down here.
I'll drop it up your ass, man!
Oh, come on.
Suck in the neck.
So the statement that you just heard ended here at line 25, and if you would read on page 53 to line 3, and that is also a statement made by Mr. Boyd.
Okay. So Boyd says, put it inside your neck. The next line is, I'm not hurting that animal. That animal ain't hurting me. I promise you, you better find a way to walk out of here together.
How did you interpret that statement from Mr. Boyd, all of those statements together?
Again, we're talking about a very descriptive threat of being able to drop a knife in somebody's body part or put it in the side of his neck. And then the switch in conversation from that direct threat to we better find a way to walk out of here together, meaning that at some point the cooperation from Mr. Boyd is still not being met. To me, it seems like he's directing those conversations.
Okay. And who specifically, when Mr. Boyd said that he was going to put a knife in someone's neck, who was he referring to, based on your observations?
Based on my observation and with Officer Weimerskirch speaking, I felt that that was directed at Officer Weimerskirch.
Okay. And did you take that statement any less seriously when Mr. Boyd referenced a dog after threatening to stab Officer Weimerskirch?
No.
Now, over time during this incident, did the nature of Mr. Boyd's threats to kill officers change?
It seemed like they became more and more aggressive as the time went on.
Okay, now, Your Honor, the next clip that I'd like to play is from Defendant Perez's Exhibit C4. It's 46 minutes, 23 seconds to 48 minutes, 36 seconds. And that is from page 53, line 4 to page 56, line 13.
53, line 4?
Yes. To 56, line 13.
Objections are 55, lines 6 through 14, 401, 402, and 403.
You put down the knives, we can walk out together.
Oh, I tried that. He said,
No.
telling me what to do.
Come on, man. I'm the one that told you that. We don't want to take it to.
Three of y'all, you two guys. Where's the hotel stay? Where's a cool place, a safe place to stay where nobody gets hurt tonight?
Well, we can work on that down the hill if you put down the knives and walk down and talk with us. But we can't talk about that up here.
You don't seem to understand. You're not informing me about how you are going to handle this matter of national security after I leave.
But we can talk about that down the hill where we can make more sense.
How is that? If I pack up a little bit, you're going to stop me. We're not going to Denny's. I'm not stupid. You're not taking me to McDonald's.
Well, this ain't working yelling at each other on a mountain.
You're going to jump me.
This ain't working yelling on a mountain. None of those people can talk to you about that stuff here.
What are we supposed to do?
Well, put down your stuff and walk out and we can talk. Because this ain't working right here, man. Foothill Station's just down the hill.
Huh?
The Foothill substation's down the hill.
How am I getting there tonight?
What's that?
How am I getting down there?
You put down your stuff, we walked down there, man. There.
Cover my defenses.
Well, why?
Murderers and rapists. I'm not getting murdered or raped up here. I'm not murdering tonight. I'm not raping tonight. I might kill. I might get stick up here 2-3 days trying to heal people. We're driving motherfucker insane. You know, this is somebody that they have to figure out whether they should live or not, whether they're a drone in the future. You don't know my powers. I'm the angel of the Lord.
You're right, I don't know that. But if we talk about yelling across the mountain, they're never gonna get there.
Will you keep approaching with weapons?
Well, you have weapons. I can't talk to you when you have weapons.
Your weapons. I'm not hurting anybody. I wouldn't threaten nobody. You got my back. You better get friendly when I grab my gear and start walking. We better show camaraderie or something. I don't feel it, man.
We need you to put down those weapons, man.
You don't tell me to put down my arms.
Well, I'm not talking to you until you do.
My arms are to protect you also.
Okay, I'm not talking to you until you put those down first.
If somebody's dying tonight, it ain't gonna be me.
Sergeant Ingram, at the beginning of that recording, well, first of all, was that your voice that we heard talking to Mr. Boyd?
Yes.
Okay, and at the beginning of the recording, you can be heard saying, if you put down the knives, we can walk out together. Is that correct?
Correct.
Why did you make that statement to Mr. Boyd?
As time has transpired of trying to de-escalate Mr. Boyd, it looks like these negotiations aren't going very well. So then I start, well, maybe I can try to start talking to him. So I wanted to make that clear that we can talk, but we needed him to put down his knives.
And throughout this entire incident, your time on the mountain, did anyone ever tell Mr. Boyd that he could walk down with his knives in his possession?
No.
And why wouldn't you have allowed Mr. Boyd to walk down while he had possession of his knives?
We're talking about allowing that person who is very, very volatile. This is one of those people that we can't gauge or trust anything he's saying at this point. So in order for us to safely conduct work, we need to make sure that those are removed from his person before we do that, because of that significant threat that he's posing with those and his ability to change in such a short amount of time without any warning, that we needed to make that safe by having him remove those himself before we make contact with him.
Now, in addition to telling Mr. Boyd that he needed to put down his knives, you also told Mr. Boyd to put down his stuff.
I did.
And what was Mr. Boyd holding when you told him he needed to put down his stuff?
I want to say it was some form of bag. I don't know if it was a backpack or a satchel, but it was some form of bag.
Okay, and why did you want Mr. Boyd to put down that satchel or bag that you've described?
When we're talking about trying to make that scene safe, as he's gathering more stuff, that's more problems for us to have to deal with. Not knowing what else is in those bags or whatever else could possibly be another weapon, something to that effect. So with him collecting more of that stuff presents more variables for us to have to deal with, knowing that there could be something else in there that we don't know about. So I didn't want him to have any of the other stuff.
Now, later on in the recording we listened to, Mr. Boyd said, despite your statement to him, he said, "I'm grabbing my backpack. Don't you fucking feel threatened." Do you remember him saying that?
Yes.
Did Mr. Boyd actually grab his backpack?
I believe so, yes.
And was Mr. Boyd's act of grabbing his backpack consistent with the commands you'd been giving him?
No, he was still doing whatever he wanted to do, regardless of what our directions or our orders were. He was still doing what he wanted to do.
And despite the fact that Mr. Boyd told you not to feel threatened, did you feel threatened when he grabbed his backpack?
I did.
And why did you feel threatened?
At this point, with Mr. Boyd's behavior and what he's demonstrated so far, I didn't take anything that he was saying as word. And it seemed to me that those threats were becoming more and more persistent, and this was now another object of being threatening to me.
And did you, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you clearly. Did you say you weren't taking him at his word?
That's correct.
And why weren't you taking Mr. Boyd at his word at this point in the incident?
Because what he's demonstrated so far, everything we've been able to talk about, the directives that we've given him, like not picking up his bag, and he did it anyway. It didn't ever feel like we had any control of what, or any relinquishment of control from him. He was never giving us any sign that he was cooperating with us at that point.
You felt that he wasn't relinquishing control to you guys?
That's correct.
And after Mr. Boyd made the statement about picking up his backpack, he said, "You better get friendly when I grab my gear and start walking." How did you interpret that statement from Mr. Boyd?
That he's in command, he's in control of encounter.
And what did you, based on your training and experience, what did you think Mr. Boyd was going to do if you did not get friendly?
That he was going to carry out the threats that he was talking about.
Now, one of the last statements we heard on that was Mr. Boyd saying, "If somebody is dying tonight, it ain't gonna be me." Is that what he said?
That is what he said.
Now, Your Honor, I'm going to like the court's permission to play another clip from Defendant Perez's Exhibit C4.
After we get jury identities.
Absolutely, Your Honor.